Friends, Steve Delamarter here, and with my friend and colleague, Dr. Ralph Lee. We'd like to talk about the THEOT dendrograms and how to read them. We consider the dendrograms to be one of the most significant outputs of the project because they are dense with information that helps you understand the nature of the entire textual history of a particular book. So they're packed with information. We want to know what they are and how to get the most out of them. Here we go.
So asking the question, what is a dendrogram? A dendrogram is a visualization of statistical data. And the most important thing to focus on is the vertical scale on the left, which is the disagreement scale.
Where does the dendrogram come from? You say it's based on statistics. What are those statistics and where do they come from? Well, here's the series of spreadsheets that we use and scripts to generate the data. The first and most significant spreadsheet is this gigantic spreadsheet. This one is made up of 1,717 lines. That's because there are 1,717 columns of aligned text that have to be analyzed. Here's the 34 manuscripts that are in our sample. And here then is a number for every column. Here it goes the other way. For every column in this column, this manuscript receives a 2 because it has a word in that column. And all of them have a 2, in fact, except for ones that have zeros, which means the manuscript was damaged and doesn't have a reading there. But that analysis is carried out now for every single manuscript, for every single column, and you can start to see patterns of places where some of them share 1s and others have 2s. But you can't tell anything based on one column. It would only be if you could somehow aggregate all of these columns and see their statistics. And that's actually what the next script does. This is a total aggregation of every one of those bits of data. And there are, in that case, close to 60,000 data points that are checked out. And then this is the set of statistics that we take from this program and feed it into our statistical package. And it's what generates the dendrogram. The dendrogram is nothing other than a visual representation of these numbers. And so that's where the numbers come from.
Okay, so coming back to the dendrogram, we've already pointed to the fact that the vertical scale on the left is the most important. And it's telling us specifically what the degree of difference is between different points on the dendrogram. The degree of difference is the precise complement of the degree of sameness, if you like. It's just 100 minus the degree of difference.
So in this case, the degree of sameness is the single largest phenomena that every dendrogram represents, because the distance from the top of the major fork that differentiates ETH1 from ETH2, this says 85% of it is uniform. That's what all this white area that goes clear beyond the top of this page shows us the single most significant phenomena of the tradition is the degree of sameness. Then from there, we can begin to look at the forks. The forks are the points that differentiate between, like, these 2 manuscripts over here and everything else over here. A huge fork that distinguishes at a 45% degree of difference. That's a very significant fork in one regard because of the degree of difference. But in terms of the other regard, actually fork B represents what we would probably say is the most telling fork in the road, because on this side is the earliest attested form of the text, the ETH1 form of the text, and on this side is the ETH2 form of the text, what we call the standardized modern Textus Receptus. And this is the single biggest phenomena of the tradition is the transformation from the earliest attested form of the text into this standardized modern Textus Receptus form of the text. So that's fork B, but this analysis can continue down, and within the earliest attested text form are all these forks that slightly differentiate the core of the tradition, the best representatives of the core of the tradition in the early days are these 8 or 9 manuscripts here, and then these other ones that have special characteristics which we'd want to study and know. The same thing then is true of the left side. You march down each of these forks of the road and analyze the distinctive. Here's the core of the standardized. We notice that the modern Textus Receptus is just right in line with the standardized form of the text, and then these other slight variations in the standardized form. So it helps then at this point to notice the correlation of chronology. Ralph, I'll let you speak a bit about this.
Yeah. So one of the immediate observations that we can make from these is that the statistics have grouped together manuscripts that are of similar ages. So notice over on the right-hand side, EA1, all of our earliest manuscripts in terms of their date are in that group. And in EA2, similarly aged manuscripts. As we come over to the ETH2 period on the left-hand side, we see manuscripts that date from the 17th century and onwards, and again grouped together largely in periods that share dates.
Yeah, it's precisely we know we're on the right track when we produce a set of data in which the chronological, we didn't do anything to make this happen. This simply happened, emerged, and we see there's a coherence between the clusters and the dates of their production. So that's one of the things that tells us indeed that we're on the right track, and we've got it right.
Another set of things called clusters of some forms that are not quite the same as the core clusters. We've noticed that, for instance, EA1 and EA2 have very, very low degrees of difference. EA3 is a special case where we've got manuscripts that don't really belong together in a cluster. Hence, we've called it a pseudo cluster. And these are outliers from EA1 and EA2 that share a lot with them, but have some key points that differentiate them. And our methods will point us to those.
Indeed, someone might object, that's not even a cluster at all. You just made it.
Right.
And we would say, yes, we acknowledge that. It's merely a convention. Back to you.
Exactly. Yeah, and the stand 3 and stand 4 are somewhat related to that in that they are clusters. They are groups of manuscripts that fall on one side of a fork, but there's a rather larger degree of difference between the manuscripts in the cluster than we would associate with the core clusters. And in these cases, we've got pairs of manuscripts that are largely the same, associated with an outlier. And again, our methodology will point us to what are the real things that characterize those? What's the data that shows us why these stand aside from the core manuscripts?
So the dendrogram enables us just from this sort of 40,000-foot view to look down on the tradition and analyze the subparts with some degree of precision. We see EA1 and EA2 low degree of difference, both witnessing to the core of the old tradition, and then these outliers, probably mixed texts between EA1 and EA2. And then we notice these manuscripts, EA4, their chronology indicates they are late copies of the earliest attested text form. So even when the new text form has emerged, these are committed to retaining the old text form and nevertheless are making concessions to some of the readings of the later text form. And similarly, we can do that with the standardized modern Textus Receptus. Ralph.
Yeah. So again, we see here that our core clusters, MTR, modern Textus Receptus, being the if you like, the end of the process, have very low degrees of difference between them. In the case of MTR here, it's somewhat less than 5%. So we have a tight cluster of manuscripts that are very similar to each other. And again, closely related to them, not much different at stand 1 and stand 2, that are part of the process, if you like, of finalizing this standard text. And then we have these other clusters that already pointed to that have a rather larger differentiation between them, that again need characterizing. We need to understand why they lie out there. They're on this side of the Great Fork, so they are ETH2 texts, but they've got some significant differences from our core clusters.
And we might notice once again the close affinity in the Book of Hosea and many other books between the modern Textus Receptus form and the earlier standardized text form from the 17th century. And this happens over and over again to such a degree. We say the ETH1 and ETH2, and ETH2 has a 2A and a 2B, and then these other outlier kinds of things. And then finally, this dendrogram says there's another thing here, the minor recension. And perhaps we've already mentioned that this is different because it's a translation of the Latin Vulgate into Ge'ez in the late 19th, early 20th century, standing at a 45% degree of difference from the rest of the tradition. And it stands at some point where we say beyond 18% or so, everything above that probably deserves a title of a minor recension.
The key point to move on with is again emphasizing that what we've been looking at are statistical relationships, but the statistical relationships point us to the key places to look to see differences. So we can look on a sort of macro scale at the key differences between ETH1 and ETH2, and then we can home in on the key differences between clusters within that, those two larger groups. So the statistical data shows us where to look in the mass of data that we have, as Steve has already mentioned, tens of thousands of data points, and find the precise places where the text is different and what that difference is.
It requires another set of scripts to take the main database and then process it further to identify precisely where it is you look. But that's the point, is that we dare not pit against one another the statistical information and the philological information. But the statistical information can do one job that is quite remarkable. We aggregate all of it and then process it. We can tell you exactly where to look. Don't waste your time looking at all these other places. Look at these 12 places and you'll see why this cluster stands apart from the others. Yeah.
So again, what does this teach us about textual history? The clusters, if you like, identify the key steps or points in the evolution of the history of the text. And as such, again, they are statistically connected only, but they are pointing us towards what philologists might call families of texts, where they can identify clear genetic relationships, if you like, to extend the analogy between the texts. So our clusters are a mechanism for pointing us to the key steps on the process of narrating textual history.
So at this point, then, we invite you to take a look at the dendrograms and test your eye on how to analyze them and look through and see, because so much can be seen just about the story of the emergence of the text form across time through the dendrogram.